Did Breath of the Wild and its obsession with rethinking conventions mark the end for traditional Zelda dungeons, or rather evolve them with new technology and approach to puzzles? And is there hope for a return of the traditional linear dungeons with the section leading to a mini-boss and then the second section leading to a boss after Breath of the Wild?
Hello everyone, I'm Conrad and welcome to another episode of After Breath of the Wild. The show where we, after the future Zelda games over the horizon introduction last time, will now do our best to identify issues and strengths plus come with conclusions as to what needs to be fixed, stay as it is, expanded upon, and introduced or reintroduced topic by topic. And to start off with a bang, we have commissioned the very talented Mella to make the thumbnails for this series, more details at the end of the video, and we are going over a big topic: dungeons, or the lack of these, in Breath of the Wild, so get ready for a long one. Since nothing defines a Zelda game like its dungeons, at least we thought so until Breath of the Wild changed that emphasis back to exploring the overworld.
Hey, I'm Joseph, but Conrad does have a point. Even in the first Legend of Zelda on the NES, which also had non-linear exploration in mind, dungeons were enemy strongholds, and keys to some of the greatest highlights and challenges found in Zelda. Over the next 25 years throughout the passage of time, across the Great Sea, the shadows of Twilight, to the mighty skies, the series developed bound, linear, deep, and combat-based dungeon formulas that had no match in the industry. After Skyward Sword, the last game to put its main emphasis on dungeons was A Link Between Worlds. So why do we not count A Link Between Worlds to the rest of the linear Zeldas? Simple. It granted us extended options through its item rental and purchase system. By taking the items out of the dungeons and placing them in Ravio's shop, the developers simplified the dungeon formula in A Link Between Worlds, while at the same time offering players to complete most of the dungeons in whichever order they pleased. And you know what? We liked this move, and thought that this might be a hint on what to expect when it came to Breath of the Wild. And based on the first teases of the game, it seemed that there were no worries about the dungeons. It was first after multiple delays, and then the E3 2017 demo, that we realized that the dungeons in Breath of the Wild outside Hyrule Castle would most likely not be traditional dungeons, but rather Sheikah-based structures, those being the Divine Beasts and Shrines.
Alright, we know that the 4 Divine Beasts in Breath of the Wild are tied to the deceased non-Hylian champions of Hyrule, are rich in lore, and can be completed in any order you prefer. That is, if you're good enough to face Vana Boris right after gliding off the Great Plateau. However, on the inside, the Divine Beasts simply fail as dungeons on so many levels. Well, with one exception. So let's get over the good news before we go into the bad, and that is the mechanical or vehicle-like nature of the puzzles in the Divine Beasts. Instead of just solving one minor puzzle to get a key, you manipulated or moved a giant machine, a true beast, and first upon mastering this one, you were able to face the boss. Mark Brown put it really well in his Boss Keys series, loved the series by the way, by calling them real-time puzzle boxes that in many ways take inspiration from Anuma-san's fascination and experience with making karakuri puppets, where manipulating an entire structure changes the layout of the entire structure. For us Westerners, a better analogy of this approach to puzzles is Hungary's greatest pride beside food, namely the Rubik's Cube.
The objective in all of these is to get a certain object to a set position. In Rubik's Puzzle, you have 6 colors that you have to match, while in Breath of the Wild's Divine Beasts, you first have to download a map and then activate 5 terminals. When we think about it, this is just like a Rubik's Cube, but where the different mechanical parts continue to move in real time, and it is up to you to change it. Moving on. If we are to give the beasts any more credit besides that, then it must be their use of the physics engine found in this game, and that some of the dungeons require something more than just using the remote to control the beasts, and actually allow players to solve a puzzle in multiple ways, by using the Sheikah runes, your items and weapons, or a combination of the two. And since we are on the topic of weapons, what use were there for weapons, since, besides the bosses, there are almost no enemies to combat in the Divine Beasts? This was probably the most shocking discovery within the Divine Beasts, seeing that dungeons are supposed to be, enemy strongholds. These places are filled to the brim with enemies with one objective: stopping Link from freeing souls or obtaining a key item on the way to Ganon or any other villain. We can't stress this enough. The Divine Beasts didn't even have mini-bosses, just Mellalys, and those eyes only spawned a few stall heads that can be knocked out with one hit. So there's little to no combat, no regular locks and keys besides the terminals to the bosses, and no need for preparation besides getting inside the beast, and then weapons and health items for the Blight Ganon fights.
We understand that the development team wanted us to be able to enter all the beasts whenever we please, and without the need for any key item. But it ruined what could have added another layer to the game, namely beast prepping with items and weapons, and of course the pacing of these massive structures. Seeing that most important items and weapons have been taken out of the dungeons and spread across the overworld, and as for the Sheikah runes, we were stuck in the first hour at the Great Plateau for a reason. Nonetheless, these elements ruin both the beast's pacing and the need for extra preparation for any of the Divine Beasts, and that really sucks, as on the inside of the Divine Beasts, even nature can harm you, with one exception, Var Meadow, which makes sense as it was the weather-based beast. However, one thing that really annoys is how the development team decided to go for identical interior design in all of the 4 beasts. Seriously, if activating the same type of terminals 4 times over didn't get old, having the same interiors 4 times over, plus all the shrines, just made this even more repetitious. In this regard, it was perhaps good that the beasts were much shorter than usual dungeons. Actually, that was another weakness when we think about it, as with the size of the Divine Beasts and how empty they were on the inside, it felt like Breath of the Wild had 2 dungeons instead of 4, plus Hyrule Castle, which pales in comparison to every past Zelda title, even those developed in a 2-year cycle, that being Majora's Mask.
But enough complaining. Now that we have identified some of the most serious problems of the Divine Beasts, how do we solve it for the next game? By scrapping it totally? Tempting, but not really, since we have a better idea. But it does require a change of priorities from the Zelda level and dungeon design team. For one, if shrine-like structures return in the open-air design of Hyrule, then the number of these have to be reduced. Don't get us wrong, we loved most of the 120 shrines, even the blessing shrines that place the puzzles in the overworld, but they simply took too much time and resources away from dungeon development. You see, in order to create those 120 shrines, they took 10 plus full traditional linear dungeons, fragmented them into pieces, and spread them underneath Hyrule. That way, they obtained 2 key objectives: bringing linear puzzles out of confined locked spaces and turning them non-linear in the open air of Hyrule, where you could use physics, Sheikah runes, or champion abilities from dungeons such as Rivali's Gale, and climbing to solve overworld puzzles in order to locate shrines and then beat a linear mini-dungeon. So what is our proposal for a Zelda dungeon formula after Breath of the Wild? Simple. Reduce the number of shrine-like structures in the overworld of whatever land we're going to visit next to somewhere between 60 and 70 across it. With this first move, you can dedicate more time, resources, and level designers to create more full-size deep dungeons. Then for variety's sake, to challenge the player and to avoid repetition, you can divide, say, 10 dungeons found in the game into 3 or 4 types of dungeon categories.
The first category is the return of traditional linear Zelda dungeons that require some preparation or items. As the wording says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The Zelda dungeons were already leaps and bounds beyond any other franchise, and wasting a masterful formula would be such a shame for the future. We don't say they should be the only dungeons found in the game or future Zelda games, but sometimes we just need a forest temple, stone tower temple, ancient cistern, or arbiter's grounds. The main reason for this is that they are necessary to reach the high notes or highlights in the Zelda dungeon repertoire that deliver on static puzzles, battles against hordes of enemies, locks and key puzzles, and obviously mini-bosses. but how many of the illustrated 10 dungeons we use in this example should be traditional, that will say linear? At least 2 and at most 4. And that goes pretty much for every of the 4 categories we're going over in the later portions of this video. Over to the second category, the Divine Beasts. There's no way that these dungeons are coming back in the same form, interiors or length as they did in Breath of the Wild. That would be uninspiring, repetitious and extremely underwhelming. In other words, a return of unchanged, identical Divine Beasts is where the metascore would drop significantly, even for a game as ambitious as an open-air Zelda title will be in 2020 somewhere. With this in mind, does mechanical real-time puzzle box machine dungeons have a future?
Yes, but in its current form in combination with a linear dungeon. Say that a dungeon plays like a traditional linear dungeon with locks and keys and mini-bosses, and then after beating that foe, the dungeon pulls a 180, does the unexpected, and reveals that the last obstacle to the boss is behind a non-linear mechanical structure or room like the Divine Beasts, but filled with enemies and unexpected challenges. Say like the Divine Trial under the Shrine of Resurrection, but with radically different design, even more enemies beyond the Guardians, but layout-wise, be similar to the Dungeon Beast fusion found in the Champion's Ballad, but one that has its own distinct design on the inside, thus surprising and immersing the player into its setting and perhaps offer a false sense of comfort which is about to be turned to shreds. That would be awesome, but maybe a little too predictable. A better option in our opinion will be the next 2 dungeon categories. Hyrule Castle in Breath of the Wild was amazing, and with a few alterations, it might mark the new staple as an open-ended Zelda dungeon. That will say that you enter and leave the structure however and whenever you please, and that the structure itself has multiple layers and variety of treasure, items, weapons, enemy defenses, etc., both on the inside and outside. Imagine if different locations have these massive structures, but where each one of them is different, with different types of puzzles, themes, opponents, and so on. However, some things should be common, namely that you can face the boss, but unless you are a pro, you will really want to sidetrack to locate the dungeon item prior to that fight instead of after it and offer reward for your hard work. Going into Hyrule Castle in the middle of the game shortly prior to obtaining the Master Sword was such an amazing experience, with many battle phases as you slowly made your way up to the top. First you had to plan from what angle to strike in order to not get blown out on the ground, in the air, or out of the waters by guardians. Then you got a very impressive cutscene before more survival exploration, while being constantly in fear if a guardian is hiding behind that rock.
That sense of fear in the outer portions of Hyrule Castle was one of the best things in Breath of the Wild, as it felt like exploration in a war zone, which Hyrule Castle kind of is in Breath of the Wild. Then your reward for surviving and exploring the structure is awesome weaponry, armor, including the classic nearly indestructible Hylian shield. We want more dungeons like Breath of the Wild's Hyrule Castle in future Zelda games. And if the next Zelda game has 3 non-linear or open-ended temples, like say fortresses or castles similar to Hyrule Castle, then we would instantly be in love. However, if we were to suggest one improvement to this new dungeon formula, then perhaps it could be a benefit to lock some areas away behind closed doors, like say, I don't know, the final boss in the game. Does it really hurt to force the player to do some more non-linear exploration or solve some puzzles, fight mini-bosses, in order to obtain keys, open locks and slowly build up to the final fight? We don't think that would have been a big problem. Now, that was the 3rd dungeon category that we could see in the next Zelda game. Then what is the 4th category?
A mystery, a brand new dungeon formula that we will never be able to come up with or predict, just like the Divine Beasts prior to the multiple delays in 2015 and 2016. And you know what? This 4th mystery category and brand new unknown formula might just be what Eiji Aonuma has in mind when he recently stated that he aims to once again subvert our expectations for the next Zelda title. In other words, don't get too attached to the Divine Beasts, traditional dungeons, or the open-ended castle, as we have an even more innovative formula in mind. We believe this is the right point to leave this final category as it is, as this isn't the time for predictions or unknown series, since there will be a time for that when we know what game we are dealing with. In conclusion, we just want to state that when it comes to Zelda dungeons, The franchise desperately needs variety and balance. Not just when it comes to the themes of the dungeons, but rather the types and even formula.
A compromise among traditional, divine beasts, open-ended and even brand new dungeons is something that will benefit the franchise as it takes the best of the best and leaves the weak sauce behind in the games they originated from. It will not offend long-time or conservative players, the new Zelda fans that came in through Breath of the Wild, or future players that are yet to discover the franchise in the coming years. Since, as a liberal conservative, I know about one important rule in life, and that is, in order to maintain something, from time to time you need to reform or completely change it. And this is also what I believe is the philosophy AJ Numa and the development team at Nintendo EPD has in mind for the future of the Zelda franchise and its dungeons. But what dungeon formula do you think we'll see in the next Zelda? A return to traditional continuation of the open-ended layout, or something brand new? Sign off in the comment section down below.
If you enjoy our After Breath of the Wild series, then make sure to leave a like, and if you are new and a Zelda or Nintendo fan, then subscribe to our channel, press that shiny notification bell, and click for all notifications as Zelda content is back on the Commonwealth realm. And with it, we have commissioned a very talented Zelda artist in the form of Mellalys from Twitter, who will be making exclusive character art for our thumbnails and future merch from this point onward that will match the theme of the different episodes. So make sure to give her some love at Mellalys on Twitter, and while you're at it, also follow us at Common Realm. Finally, we want to thank all of our loyal patrons, and in particular, royal producer Kenyatta Ali. You can join the ranks too and support our ambitious 2019 productions and series by heading over to patreon.com/commonrealm and enter our Big Smash and Pokemon giveaway.